Hello, hello, hello. We're just gonna, sorry, can you close the door? Perfect. Our next speaker is Veronika Kuett. She is a Layer 2 and Bitcoin adjacent researcher at Bitcoin Layers, and she's gonna give an awesome talk that explores the potential of innovations like Ark, BitVM, and Shielded CSV to scale Bitcoin in a more trust-minimized way. Let's give a round of applause for Veronika.
Thank you. Does this work? Yeah, it's not far. Okay, cool. Yeah, thanks for the intro. I don't have to add anything else, actually. Very briefly, a reminder, what are we actually here for? Or at least this is my goal, to make Bitcoin, to establish it as global money. What we currently have, the internet, is kind of like the internet of information. We can send around data. But we have the double spending problem. So when we want to send around digital value, we need a trusted third party. Bitcoin solved that issue, and I'm looking forward in the next decade to get rid of the term of cross-border payments, because we also don't send around cross-border emails. Yeah, so another little reminder, what is money? Money has three functions. The first function is the store of value function, and I think we have still some hurdles. Bitcoin has highish volatility. We have unusual self-custody, or many noobs perceive it as unusual and not the best inheritance mechanisms and everything. Still, I think store of value is like pretty decent, actually. Medium of exchange, what do we actually want? We want high throughput with low fees while preserving the properties of Bitcoin, like censorship resistance, borderless, neutral, etc., etc. And we want to be able to self-custody our funds. Or if it's an L2, we want to be able to unilaterally exit this L2. And if possible, have these payments be private. The unit of account function, I think once we have a really good medium of exchange, people will start to price their goods in Bitcoin. So this is a no-brainer once we have the medium of exchange. Where do we actually stand at the moment? What is the status of LN, the UX in a self-custodial manner, and the scalability? Currently, we don't have offline receive. We don't have async payments. We have inbound liquidity issue. That means if you want to receive funds in the first place, you need to source liquidity from somewhere to receive, which is like a super bad user experience. I was sometimes saying, like, Phoenix is a great product if you know how LN works. If you don't know, like, you just get surprised with suddenly having a splice in or whatnot, and like you have high fees. And you have the channel management. From a user experience perspective, it's not optimal, and also scalability-wise, it's not optimal. Because every self-custodial user needs to have their own channel, and they have to manage it. And Peter Todd published a paper. Oh shit, this also still has. So Peter Todd published a paper 2 weeks ago or so, where he did a little calculation. Oh my. It's not visible. Yeah, anyway. Where he said, like, if we use like 90% of the block space, we could onboard 1.1 billion users per year onto Bitcoin, and we could have like 400 million splices per year. That would mean like every second user can do one splice per year. Yeah. Okay, but we don't take into account the routing problem then, because if we have like a network where everyone is like connected with one channel to a big hub, then yeah, routing is an issue. So it's still, unfortunately, a slightly unpopular opinion, but I think few end users will use Lightning in a self-custodial manner. And this is also what we're seeing currently. The status quo is approximately a ratio of 1 to 8 of non-custodial to custodial usage of Lightning. And yeah, the theory is Bitcoin and Lightning won't suffice to scale Bitcoin payments in a way that its properties can be preserved and the end user UX is foolproof. So how else can we scale? I have 3 to 4 categories. Maybe the fourth is actually part of the second. I'm happy to discuss that. First one is bigger blocks. Second one is a UTXO peg or a transfer. In the peg category, we have sidechains like Liquid or RSK, or we have eCache. What we have with these systems is always the issue. We have the T of N honesty assumption. We have always some form of federation with some confetti around, but if you break it down, it's like a federation. In the transfer category, I see state chains where you basically have a UTXO and you transfer the ownership of that UTXO to someone else. Then we have UTXO sharing. Lightning is an example where we have like 2 people sharing one UTXO, and we have ideas like coin pools, etc., etc. And then we have blockchain as a data availability layer, which is, for example, for CSV protocols or rollups. And I want to present 3, so it's going to be a quick run-through. Protocols that popped up in the last year, which I think are highly interesting. This is on one hand BitVM. With BitVM, we can improve on the T of N honesty assumption and break it down to an existential honesty assumption, so we can bridge to site systems in a better way. Ark is a UTXO sharing protocol, and then we have Shielded CSV, a new client-side validation model. The white paper actually just got released last week. Let's get started. Ark, a footprint minimal coin swap protocol. Ooh, what is that? An Ark is managed by a so-called Ark service provider. It's similar to, like in Lightning, we have LSPs, in Ark we have ASPs. An ASP is an always-on server that facilitates coin swaps and provides liquidity. What does it mean to facilitate coin swaps? So with Ark, a payment happens kind of in the way that if Alice makes a transaction with Bob, Alice gives her coin to the server, and then Bob gets a coin, roughly spoken. And then you're like, oh, that sounds pretty trusted. It's not. We have certain mechanisms to make that trustless. So actually, Alice only gives her coin to the server if the server already paid Bob, kind of. And this is also where the liquidity requirements come in, because the ASP has to front the liquidity for every payment that is being made via its server. Footprint minimal, why is that? Because we have one shared UTXO that we put on the blockchain, and this can encapsulate like hundreds, thousands, I don't know how many of transactions, but very many. So yeah, it's based on a shared UTXO model. The coin ownership in Ark is managed via a transaction tree. The transaction tree lives on-chain in the form of a shared UTXO. So what does it look like? This is a very, very simplified version of it. But what we basically have is like here, up the line is on-chain. We have a shared output with coins that go to A, B, C, and D. And all recipients, so it says transaction 10 BTC, and it says A plus B plus C plus D, which means this is the recipients of the coins in this round, it's called. And all recipients sign off on this shared UTXO. That means that this shared, with an N of N multisig, not T of N or whatever, N of N, to spend these funds in another way, it would need another signature from all recipients. And then this signed transaction shares an output over 2 other transactions. These get locked by the signers of this. And in the end, what we have at the very bottom is pre-signed transactions by individual users. And these leaves of the tree, this is called, you might have heard the term, a VTXO. So it's a pre-signed transaction, and with this pre-signed transaction, a user can at any time push this on-chain and unilaterally exit the Ark. And with all this pre-signing and everything, what we have is a covenant-like functionality. So this is why we actually consider this transaction tree as a covenant tree. If we had covenants on Bitcoin, we would not need, we could get rid of certain signing steps. In Ark, you have 2 ways to make payments. One is trustless, with this unilateral exit option. The other one is trusted. The trustless version is this swapping VTXOs atomically. So the ASP initiates and coordinates so-called Ark rounds to facilitate payments. They are atomic. So during each round, there is this transaction tree where you have in the leaves all the VTXOs, which enable to unilaterally exit. And with each new round, a new transaction tree is being created. And to make this atomic, we have two building blocks. One is a so-called forfeit transaction, where Alice, so we assume Alice wants to send to Bob, Alice signs a forfeit transaction that makes her relinquish on the VTXO she has. Yeah? And then we have a connector output that is an input to this forfeit transaction. And with a connector output, it requires that the ASP already made a new round transaction with a new transaction tree where the ASP gives funds to Bob. So this is the, if you give funds to Bob, then you can get my funds. This is basically what happens there. Kind of also a covenant-ishy way of transacting. The downside of this is we have high liquidity requirements for the ASP because all the as said, the ASP needs to pre-fund every transaction, and a user needs to wait for a round. If a user wants to make a faster payment, they can do this in a trusted manner and kind of pass on VTXOs. Those payments are called ARKUR, Ark out-of-round payments. So VTXOs just get passed on. It only needs a co-signature from the ASP. The thing is, the trust model changes. It becomes kind of state chain-like, where the ASP can collude with the previous owner and steal and could double spend. So you need a certain trust. But for brief onboarding or whatnot, it can be used. The hurdles, summed up, high liquidity requirements for the ASP. I have here an extract from a blog post written by Ark Labs, one of the companies that writes an implementation of Ark. What we see here is like Alice transfers 0.33 BTC to Bob in 3 transactions, each 0.11. So here's the payment, here's the value, this is how much Alice has. Here should be, I think it was easier, 0.11 always, and liquidity needed. So in the first transaction, Alice sent 0.11, so she only has 0.89 left, and Bob has 0.11. So one transaction of 0. The liquidity needed for the ASP to facilitate this payment is not 0.11, it's 1 full Bitcoin. Because ASP transactions mimic UTXO behavior, so you don't just have the transfer value that needs to be funded, but also the change output. And altogether, we make a transaction of 0.33 in 3 transactions, and we need 2.67 Bitcoin to facilitate that. So we have a factor of 8. It gets worse. If Alice transfers this amount in 10 transactions, yeah, tick, 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 point, 8, 9, 10, for transferring 0.33 BTC, the ASP needs 8.5 Bitcoin. This is a factor of 25. Yeah. So yeah, it will be seen which kind of transactions are actually made via round, with size of transactions, etc. And the fees for making payments on ARKs will depend on the liquidity requirements. Yes. No, what I'm saying is that if you have a transaction with the same value, if you split it up in smaller payments, the higher the liquidity requirements get. It blows up. This is a blog post by Ark Labs. You'll find it. I was like, when I read it, I was like, ooh, okay. Not sure what this means for Ark, how we use it, but that's an issue. And this will feed a lot into how we actually use Ark and which payments we make custodial, which we make non-custodial, etc., etc. The hurdles, high liquidity requirements. ARKUR can alleviate on the liquidity requirements, but as said, trust model changes to state chain like. The other thing is we have a liveness requirement for users because VTXOs have an expiration time. In practice, it's not as bad. The user just needs to open their wallet once during this timeout period. Oh, yeah. And can auto-refresh the coins, the VTXOs the user has can be auto-refreshed. And also, if the user doesn't open their wallet in this timeout period, a watchtower could be used to trigger a unilateral exit of the VTXO. So I think the liveness requirement is less of an issue, actually. Status quo of development, we have 2 companies building implementations on Ark. That's Ark Labs. They have like a covenant-less version on Bitcoin, and they have a covenant version of Ark on Liquid, because there we have certain opcodes that we don't have on Bitcoin. No ASP on mainnet, but soon. Then there is Second. The company just got announced, I think, a week ago or so. They made their first mainnet transaction on Bitcoin. They were onboarding users via Ark Core, these Ark out-of-round payments. They did a cooperative exit and a unilateral exit. So Ark, I see as a UTXO sharing-based site system with an integrated bridge that ensures unilateral exit option. Ark is site system plus bridge. What if we had an independent tool that can bridge to whichever site system? And why don't we have that yet? This is a non-exhaustive list, but we have some limitations in Bitcoin script. For example, we don't have transaction introspection or statefulness. And that means that Bitcoin, it just cannot argue what happens on another system. Let's say we have a peg out in RSK, of RBTC on RSK, and Bitcoin is like, I don't know what happens there. Yeah. And another thing is that we have a lack of arithmetic opcodes, for example, for multiplication. I mean, you can express a multiplication with additions like plus, 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 plus. Where you see it can become very large, very data heavy. So we can actually express anything in Bitcoin script, but we just can't verify it because the length of this thingy, we cannot squeeze it into a block. Yeah, it's just too large. Yeah, so data cannot be verified in a block. But there is a workaround. So last year, Robin Linus, he published an idea where he made it possible to allow for arbitrary computation on Bitcoin, and it's called BitVM. I will give a very, very brief intro because Sergio Lerner will give a talk about it, and they have some other, so there'll be quite some BitVM talk here these days. And the primary use case of this is to verify ZK proofs expressed in Bitcoin script, and also, and this is the main thing, to enable trust minimized bridges to other systems. Because at the moment on Ethereum, we have all these rollups and whatnot, because Solidity is just a more expressive programming language. On Bitcoin, we couldn't do that, but now we have a possibility to bridge to. So what we will probably see is like kind of a lot of projects popping up on Bitcoin in the next year. BitVM is based on 3 primitives. Is on one hand a taproot Merkle tree of scripts. So what you have is like a Merkle tree, and you can put your scripts kind of in the leaves of the tree. The thing is, if you do that, you have a bit of script here in the tree, you have a bit of script here, and you cannot relate the leaves to one another because we don't have statefulness on Bitcoin. We cannot carry over state from one output to another. So we need a key value store that can be accessed across individual scripts. And that is being made possible via Lamport signatures. Lamport signatures are one-time digital signatures where you basically, with every signature you make, you create a new public and private key pair. And that makes it possible to sign off on specific values. The third primitive is optimistic computation, where you have the possibility, if someone claims that certain data is true, others can come and challenge this, this claim. Yeah, as said, very short. Quick run-through of how BitVM works. So a BitVM operator compiles a program into a snark. That can be like a peg-out program from a site system, a peg-out transaction from a site system. Yeah, so someone pegged out RBTC on RSK, and then the operator compiles that into a snark, expresses it in Bitcoin script, and then takes this thing, because as we learned, this is so large, we cannot verify it in a block. So we need to split that snark up into several sub-functions, and then these sub-functions we just put into the leaves of the taproot tree, or Merkle tree. And the operator then commits to this Merkle tree on-chain in a taproot output, and also provides the outputs of the respective program. So everyone, data availability problem aside, we assume the inputs of the program are publicly known. Everyone can check off-chain this respective program and then potentially challenge the operator. If the operator is challenged, the operator is forced to provide the intermediary results of these sub-functions. And if he's dishonest, he gets punished. If not challenged, the operator can withdraw funds from the bridge contract. Et voila, we can bridge to side systems. Yeah, so same BitVM requires spending restrictions, similar to Ark. This is emulated via signers committee, because still we don't have covenants on Bitcoin. And the signers committee also pre-signs transactions with an n of n spending condition, and we have one of n honesty assumption here now. It's not like traditional federations, like the Liquid Federation or RSK Federation or what it's called. They have T of n honesty assumption. Here we get 1 of n honesty, because if we have an n of n signers committee and we have funds that can only be spent with an n of n, and one of the signers throws away their keys, then you just can't spend these funds in any other way. So we only need 1 honest party instead of T honest parties. And in BitVM, anyone can challenge a potentially fraudulent operator. In BitVM X, it's not anyone at the moment at the current stage of implementation, but they will also upgrade to it. And BitVM has a 1-round challenge mechanism, which makes it very expensive, though. So, and to challenge, you have to front the capital, which currently in BitVM is around 2 to 3 BTC. So it's a very high upfront cost you have, and that means that in practice, probably not many people will challenge a fraudulent operator. Yeah.
So I think that only applies to BitVM 2.
Yeah. BitVM X has several rounds. It's like $400 currently, and they are aiming at even, probably they'll announce this afternoon that they managed to bring it down to $150, $200 of challenging cost. But they have several rounds, so it takes a certain time, the whole challenge response game. Yeah, and that's the same. It's like, for which use case? At the moment, we have this new thing, the BitVM, and we're like, ooh, we can bridge to other systems. We can verify snarks. And now we're like, OK, how do we set the parameters? For which use case do we actually use what? And so on and so on. Yeah. And I mean, we're hyper early with all this. Yeah. So what we have with BitVM, then, is a bridging mechanism with existential 1 of n honesty assumption. It's a bridge. It's not a side system. And it can bridge to a side system. Shielded CSV, the paper got published just last week. And it's a CSV protocol that hides the transaction history. And it's built on several design principles. For example, don't validate on-chain what can be validated off-chain. And don't write on-chain what can be communicated off-chain. Yeah, so we need to be very careful what we actually put into blocks, because block space will get expensive. At least that's, I think, our assumption, to have Bitcoin also be secure in the future. How does it work? So you can, every coin in a CSV means client-side validation. Every coin in a CSV protocol has an associated coin proof. And the coin proof kind of proves the correctness of the entire transaction history. And so far, in traditional CSV protocols, the transaction history was kind of visible. The thing is now, we can compress the coin history into a snark. I mean, we could do that before, but then Bitcoin was like, oh, what is this snark thing? I cannot verify this. But now with BitVM, we have a possibility to verify a snark on Bitcoin. So this is why we can upgrade CSV protocols and actually hide their coin history, which is pretty cool. And this coin proof is just sent peer-to-peer, off-chain. Yeah? And only the recipient needs to download and verify this coin proof. We have no on-chain pollution here whatsoever. It's like the eCash kind of thing, where you have this digital piece of data, yeah? Just with CSV, you just don't need a mint anymore. Yeah. But OK, we need to prevent double spending in some way. Yeah? Because if you just send off-chain, and it's like, yeah. And to prevent that, the coins that have been spent, they need to be nullified. Means like made that they're not usable anymore, kind of. And every coin can be uniquely identified via an index in a transaction output list. Yeah. So, and its transaction hash. So only these nullifiers, they get posted on the blockchain. Yeah. And then the recipient can kind of check, OK, this coin hasn't been spent yet. And then they check their coin proof and such. And yeah, the good thing is the users only need a single Schnorr signature to verify. And I think that was important to the authors of the paper, that non-users can ignore this data. Not every full node has to verify that in any way. Back to the design principles, as I said, don't validate on-chain what can be validated off-chain. The token history only needs to be verified by the recipient. Don't write on-chain what can be communicated off-chain. Transaction data and token history is sent off-chain, peer-to-peer, except the nullifier. What are the properties? As already mentioned, the snark compression brings that we can hide the coin transaction history now. And it brings a constant size of 64 bytes that need to go on chain, regardless of the transaction size, because all the transaction history, snark, and 64 bytes. If we used 100% of Bitcoin blockchain, block space, only for nullifiers, we'd have approximately 100 transactions per second. And this is a comparison table from the paper, actually. So RGB. Yeah, the downside of shielded CSV is it's not LN compatible, but it can be like with PTLCs or so. Like we'll see, but it's an account-based model. It's not an UTXO kind of based model. And yeah, the coin proof size gets much smaller because we can compress the coin history and such. But I can recommend to look that up. Yeah. So what do we have with shielded CSV? An independent and private side system using Bitcoin as a data availability layer. It's a side system. It's not a bridge, but it uses BitVM as a bridge. So it's kind of the modular kind of thing. Yeah. Yeah, OK. How could all these systems get bridged? Lightning can serve as a connective tissue. So what I see, because yeah, in the future the user doesn't really know sometimes if they use Ark, if they use eCash or whatnot, it will be made interoperable via Lightning and Lightning invoices. And yeah, that was it.